welcome you to the second presentation of the Bailey's Harbor Historical Society. A few months ago, we had Bill Tischler in the Frogtown Art Colony, and tonight we are so pleased to be celebrating with the Nelson family the 65th anniversary of the Nelson store, which, as we all know, is a landmark of Bailey's Harbor. We're pleased so many of you are here tonight. Any town, every town has a history, and this is what it's about. It's about sharing with the people that love Bailey's Harbor and care about the preservation. The first part of our program will be Gary Nelson and Steve Hay doing the oral history of the Nelson store. And the second part of our program tonight is going to be to honor Mary Ann Johnson, who did so much to preserve the history of Bailey's Harbor. As you all know, the Bailey's Harbor Historical Society is relatively new, and we are an outgrowth of the town asking a committee to study the purchase of the McCardle House, which we decided not to do at the time. But it was then determined that we really needed a historical society in this town to preserve our history. And since we've become a 501(c)(3) corporation, that was one of our accomplishments this year, we have set up bylaws, we have a board, and we have even started collecting for our archives. And I know that a lot of you people here have things that you would like to at some point donate, and we will be more than ready to accept those. We have new board members that will be coming up for the following year, and our new president will be Susie Baldry. Our vice president will be Kristen Pyle, and our treasurer, Mary Moran. Are you here? Oh, right over there. So those are our new officers for the coming year. We're excited about this organization, and by seeing so many of you here tonight, it also gives us the impetus to keep going and keep collecting. We're a part of the Wisconsin Historical Society, thanks to Roy Cole, who, under his able tutelage, because he was very involved with the Wauwatosa Historical Society and connected us with them, that we were recognized by them, and we are now a member of the Wisconsin Historical Society. So I think we have a really bright future ahead of us, and I know that you will want to join us in making this a successful historical society, and by coming here and showing your support, it really gives us the impetus to keep on going and keep on presenting and finding things that are relative. I just want to also in the beginning thank Mary Ann Johnson, because I think that she has a wonderful display and array of articles that were in the Door County Advocate, and they're absolutely wonderful, and I hope you take the time tonight to look at all those articles, and it's really fun to see the pictures. I also invite you, before we start even, we have refreshments in the back, and more than happy for having you go back now during the program or whenever and have some refreshments. I also want to point out that on the tables in the front here, we have the various videos that Mary Ann Johnson has made, and they are in our Bailey's Harbor Library, and I invite you to take them out from the library. You can't take them out tonight because they're going to be closing, but these are all available for anyone to view at any time, and they're wonderful. So without further ado, I want to invite the person up tonight who is going to be the person that will be doing the oral history with Gary, and it is Steve Hay, and he is Professor Emeritus from Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. And he is also his family has had long-term ties to Bailey's Harbor. He also happens to be my neighbor. So we are really happy that Steve is going to do this for us tonight. And so I'm going to let him present the topic for this evening.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, I'm Steve Hay, and what we're doing tonight is an oral history interview, and it's in sociology we call it a qualitative interview. Can you hear me? Okay. What we're doing tonight is an oral history interview, and what we're going to do is explore the 65-year history of Nelson Shopping Center and through dialogue. And so Gary Nelson, senior member of the Nelson family here in Bailey's Harbor, and I've been working back and forth and sort of working up a series of points that we're going to work our way through. And so it'll be a conversational type of format. If you have questions, please wait until the end, and so we'll go through the whole thing, then you can ask all your questions. Now, you'll notice that one of the things we're doing is we're videotaping the event, and so this is Laddie Chapman. He's doing the videotaping for us, and this and every event in the future will be videotaped. Now, you'll also notice is on the table, I've got much more minimalist equipment, and I brought this really for a reason, and that is what that little tape recorder is a digital tape recorder. And it's the type of tape recorder that if you're interested in doing family members, it's a type of tape recorder you can buy now, and it's relatively inexpensive compared. I think the last time I got equipment for a project I was going into was like $300 to $400. This was $119, and it does much more than the old equipment ever could have done. So I brought it in just so you could see the types of equipment that's available. And what we're thinking of doing in the future, or actually what we're planning to do in the future, is the Historical Society is going to buy a couple sets of recording equipment for members of the Bailey's Harbor community who are interested in interviewing their elders and getting all the stories that, families tend to say, I wish I had sat down with da-da-da-da. And so we're going to have a couple sets of equipment where you can do that. And then within the summer also, I'm going to do some workshops around interviewing. Simple. The interviewing itself is actually not that difficult, but just some of the basic points of interviewing, and then how to use equipment. So we'll be doing a couple of workshops around that if you want to do some interviewing your family members. And for that reason, we brought this in also so you could sort of see the type of equipment that's going to be available. Finally, it really is, for me, it's a great honor to be here tonight and being a part of this activity. And I was telling Gary and Peggy that my parents retired up here. They actually were here for many years, and they finally spent their retirement years up here. And I think with absolute certainty, the place they enjoyed more than anywhere else in the world while they were up here was Nelson's. And I have absolutely no doubt. I have no doubt if they were still around, they'd be somewhere in that first row. So anyway, so let us begin. Let me get up the first picture.
There's that arrow key that you're going to want. Oops, wait.
Where'd you go?
No.
One of the difficult parts of retiring, I've discovered, is not actually retiring, it's losing your technical support staff that was always there available for me at a call.
Now I think I'm going to have to turn these lights out. Can you soldier through? Or is that view? Is that beautiful?
We can see it.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay, well, if it's impossible.
Okay, so,
Can you turn some of them off?
I've tried to do that, but I can't figure it out.
yeah.
Okay, can you?
Yeah, just a moment, we're doing damage control.
Can I turn the back ones on? Oh.
Well, yeah, let's go. Well, let us begin. Okay. So Nelson's began with your father.
That's correct.
And so why don't you start by telling us a little bit about what drew Gordy to business?
My dad grew up in Gills Rock, Ellison Bay area, and both his folks and his mother's folks homesteaded from the government up there. He pretty much ran around on the whole north end of the peninsula. If he wasn't on snow skis, he was whatever. But he enjoyed being in business. And when he got old enough, his older brothers started working for the fishermen, which job was dark to dark, 6 days a week. And he thought that he liked the retail business a little better, so he rented a small building from Harry Voigt. Harry Voigt is Wayne Voigt's father. And it was set up at the Northport, Gills Rock, Northport dock. There's a picture of it there. And he sold night crawlers, he sold ice cream, he sold hamburgers, he sold hot dogs, he sold postcards, he sold everything he could get his hands on. He rented fishing poles. He was just an entrepreneur right there at the ferry dock. And at the end of the summer, he made more money than his brothers did, working for the fishermen, dark to dark, 6 days a week. So he was operating that stand right there, a lot of fun stories about it. He bought these big, long cane fishing poles for 25 cents, and he rented them out for 50 cents. He rented a small boat, and with the boat came a bailing can. The boats leaked pretty bad, but they were happy. He could sell hamburgers, and he's convinced everybody that he can make 10 hamburgers out of a pound of hamburger. So he did quite a business there. He was closed down once by the State Board of Health because he didn't have an outhouse. So he found an outhouse someplace, and of course, he had to dismantle it to move it, so he dragged it back into the woods. And he nailed 3 sides to 3 walls and hung an old door on the front, and he was back in business.
So when the war came, it had been about the time he'd be getting out of high school, I imagine, or thereabouts. What did he do during the war years?
During the war years, or just before the war years, he was working on the Great Lakes with his father, who was a chief engineer for the ore carriers. And he was on the boat, and then he was drafted while he was on the boat. He came home, and him and his brother enlisted at the same time, and they headed off. His brother went off to war, and my dad was rejected because of his poor eyesight. They told him if he lost his glasses, he would have been lost. So he stayed in the military. He went to California. He was involved in the Army Air Corps, and he was working for Pan American maintenance on airplanes.
And then when did he come back to Bailey's Harbor?
When the war was over, he came back. His brother, who was also working with Pan American, tried to talk him into staying out there, but he decided that he wanted to come back. He liked the retail business. So he came back to Door County and did some research, and he bought a store in Bailey's Harbor from Arnie Pruder.
Yeah. It's probably not the best picture in the world, but
If you notice the old theater in the front, the old store was the original, it is now the Fish Creek Moccasin Shop. That's the first store that he started. When he told his mother that he was moving to Bailey's Harbor, she laid her head on the table and cried. She said, "How can a young Baptist boy coming out of the Baptist church in Ellison Bay, move into a town that had more taverns than churches.
Well, when you when he opened up that store, where did your parents live?
My parents lived in the back of the store. This was well, actually, Dad bought the store first in 1945. He married my mother in 1948, and they lived in the back of the building where the living quarters are still there to this day.
Okay. So I know during that period of time that you eventually moved to, in the early 1950s, you moved to roughly the same location that you're in now. Tell me about, again, the building of the family home, because suddenly
Okay,
you...
my older brother Paul and my older sister Carol were born in this first building in 1949 and in 1950. In 1951 was when they moved to the new location, and I was born in 52. So I never lived in that location. I grew up in the present store building.
But the house, I mean, the store that you bought didn't come with the house. You know, he eventually had to build the house.
That's correct.
Now part of the store.
The store originally belonged to a Gerdman, and I don't remember what the first name was. And was it George Gerdman? Okay, George Gerdman and my dad then swapped properties. So George Gerdman moved over to the post office, and he owned that for many years, and he owned it when it was a post office. And then Dad bought the store that was kind of under construction. And then he built a house directly alongside of it, which at present time is now the motel building.
Yeah. And it seems to me you were saying that then shortly after the first floor of that house was built, that the mother-in-law, you know, one of the mother-in-laws wanted to move, and you
Correct.
went on? And what happened?
When, shortly after my folks were married, my mother's mother came to live with us. And she put in money and pretty much paid for the second floor of which is presently now the motel building. And she only lived a few years, and then she died. And then my father bought out my mother's brother.
Okay.
So then he owned the entire building.
And when he got that store originally, it was just like one floor. And I seem to recall it didn't have a basement, which...
That's correct. There were just footings in the first floor of the building. And my dad told me, I don't remember this, but he told me he shoveled out the basement by hand with a wheelbarrow, wheeled it out to the back of the building, put it in his pickup truck, and hauled it out to the dump.
Oh, yeah. I missed one thing. And that was you might say a few words about the Egg Harbor store.
Sure. Right around that same time, a store in Egg Harbor came up for sale. My father purchased it. There's a picture of it right there. It is now the present Greens and Grains, that natural store. That was the building. And he ran that for a few years. He was over there, and my mother was taking care of the Bailey's Harbor store, along with 4 or 5 of his kids. And then they would switch off back and forth, and the store eventually became too much for them to have 5 kids and 2 stores.
Okay.
So the Egg Harbor store actually did a better business. They generated more money over there, but the house was already built in Bailey's Harbor. So we sold the Egg Harbor store and decided to focus on Bailey's Harbor.
Well, and this is a picture of the original store on the east side.
Yes, that's part of the same building that we have now. If you notice in the front window, there's a toilet. And a freezer and some other stuff. That was shortly after the war. Most people still had outhouses, so that was an up and coming thing.
So you, so to speak. So this brings us to just like what the store initially carried and how that product line changed over time. Because it was originally a Nelson's hardware store.
Yes, it started out as a true hardware store. And I remember talking to my dad about how he got started. And a lot of credit had to be given to the salesman from Wardy Murphy Company in Green Bay, where he bought most of his stuff. And I remember his name, he was Marty Bracken. And he would come up and Marty would sell him. He says, okay, you need some 16-ounce hammers. And Dad would say, yeah. He says, give me a half a dozen of those. And Marty would say, you only need 2. And then he would say, okay, you need some turpentine. And he says, okay, give me a couple of those. No, you need a dozen of those. So he really wasn't, he didn't grow up in a hardware store. He just kind of learned it as he went along.
You know, one of the stories you were telling me that I found really interesting was that, and it struck me as an old Door County story, and that is how difficult it was back at that period of time to make a living, and how your dad had to do so many different things to make a living running a store. So could you tell us a little bit about some of the things he did?
Well, when I was growing up, we had a laundromat in the basement. And I think he had about 12 or 15 washing machines. We had an extractor and about 4 big dryers. And people would bring their laundry in and we would wash their laundry, wash it, dry it, fold it, put it in a bag for 75 cents a load or something like that. He also, during the strawberry season, he drove a strawberry truck for Philip Erickson, where he would leave Bailey's Harbor around 6 o'clock in the evening, drive to Milwaukee in a refrigerated truck, unload the strawberries, and come back to Bailey's Harbor. He also had numerous jobs such as constable, justice of the peace. He drove school bus for the Bailey's Harbor School for many years. And I thought all these jobs were just fun jobs. You know, to me, they were interesting and something to do, but it was him trying to make a living and keep us 5 kids all around the table. And it wasn't easy making money in a small town in a short season. So he worked hard. He worked very hard to support us and keep us going.
Yeah, and there'll be a picture coming up that's slightly out of place, but it shows the boat dock that used to be behind Nelson's. And the gist of the picture for our purposes is one thing, but it has that dock. And notice that when we get to it, because then near the end, there's now the marina, and you can sort of see juxtaposed, the two juxtaposed. Your dad also was involved in a whole lot of different community service types of events, types of activities. And you were telling me about the fire engine, which, being someone who came out of the Chicago suburbs, I just was sort of just flummoxed at the thought that the fire engine may be like in your back of your store. And that's a great, it's something very much of Bailey's Harbor. Tell us about that, if you would.
The first fire engine was partially funded by the Boynton estate. I guess we had a bad fire in town or something, and the Boynton family decided that we need a fire truck, so they bought a fire truck and gave it to the town. Town really had no home for it. It was just kind of in garages all over the place. So Dad tells a story of one day the town board was on the back of the building measuring the doors. And they determined that the fire truck would fit in there. This was after he shoveled it out. And so they agreed, and it was probably something like $5 a month to keep the fire truck in the basement. And of course, having the fire truck in the basement meant he was the chief. So we had the fire trucks in there for many years. I remember it distinctly. I hung them around as a kid. I was down there all the time goofing around. I remember the story of the State Board of Health coming into the store and coming upstairs and saying, there's a fire truck in the basement. And he said, yes, it is. That's where we keep it. He says, well, you can't have a fire truck in the basement. He said, why not? Because there's gasoline in it and that makes it a fire hazard. Well, he says, you have to have gasoline in the fire truck or it won't run. So he said, well, he says, we'll have to take the gas out of it then. No. The inspector said, you can't do that because then you won't be able to respond to a fire. He says, I don't understand how a fire engine can be a fire hazard. I mean, you should actually give me credit for this. So that went on for a substantial amount of time, the State Board of Health or with the building inspector. And I guess they finally agreed that the town would build a wall, a firewall between where the fire trucks were and the store building. So the town attorney said that they couldn't spend any town money remodeling our building. So they gave Dad a raise that 1 year to pay for the concrete wall that they had to put up. And after the wall was put up, they immediately lowered his wages again.
That's wonderful.
But the fire truck stayed there until finally they moved him out, the town built their own station.
Yeah. And he was involved in a whole series of public service types of things.
Yes, he was on the Door County Chamber of Commerce for many years. He was 20-some years on the Gibraltar School Board. He was very active in the Baptist Church in Sister Bay. Lots of organizations. He was a charter member of the Bailey's Harbor Lions Club. He wasn't very active in it, but he was a member of it. Bailey's Harbor Men's Club way back. So he was pretty active in the community.
Yeah, I would say very active. Well, one of the big points of transitions in the life of the store that you were telling me about is when you became part of True Value. And one of the things you were saying is that when your dad joined True Value, it allowed him to buy better.
True Value was kind of the turning point for the success of the business. As you recall, there used to be franchises for freight lines, for trucking. And we would order our merchandise from Morley Murphy out of Green Bay, and we would wait 2 weeks for freight to get here. And towards the end, it got so bad, they wouldn't run a truck up to Bailey's Harbor unless they had more than one shipment. And sometimes they waited till they had a full truck to come up here. So we waited for our freight until they felt like delivering it. And one of the last freight runs that we got from them was in the summertime. There was no place for them to park, so they stopped in the middle of the road, dropped the freight off right in the lane of traffic, came in, we signed the bill, and they drove away and left the freight in the middle of the road. One of the main reasons, not one of the main reasons, one of the big reasons we joined True Value was that they had their own trucks. And when we ordered our freight, we could get our freight on a regular scheduled basis.
And then eventually, what happens is you're saying that at one time or another, almost every one of your brothers and sisters worked in the store. And that, talk about that part and what they all went on to.
There were 5 of us kids. My older brother did a lot of work in the store. He helped with, helped with checking out. And he also helped me when we delivered propane. I wasn't old enough to drive yet, so he would drive, and we would do the propane route. He helped in the laundry. He helped in the store, along with my older sister and my 2 younger sisters. But when they went off to college, they kind of chose other places. My brother moved to Florida. He didn't like the winters. My sister got married, my older sister, and moved to Minnesota. My younger sister got married and moved to New Jersey. That would be Jan. And Margie, my younger sister, moved to Atlanta. So I was kind of left the only one that was really interested in the store. And I don't know, do we go into the...
Yeah, we haven't talked about, and then your dad began to take the space being vacated and creating a motel.
Correct. He built basically two 3-bedroom houses, one on top of the other one. And after my grandmother died, he then rented out the top floor. That was too big, so he divided it in half and made it into 2 units. Then, as us kids started leaving home, he started dividing up the house. And right now, we have 5 suites and 1 motel room on that present property.
And then you went off to school in 1971, and there was a period of time when a lot of things were happening with zoning laws and need of more space and in the store, and your dad came to you and sort of tell the story of.
I guess we saw the writing on the wall that zoning was coming to Door County. And as you can see by that picture there, that building is very close to the road. And if we were gonna remodel it and enlarge it, we had to do it now because the new zoning would not allow it. So we started in the fall and we dug the footings for the front of the building, and we dug right out to the sidewalk, as close to the road as we possibly could, and built the front on. Then we built the north side of the building on, and then we built the back of the building on. And we built as close to the water as we possibly could. We left just enough room to drive around the building. And that was done when I was starting my junior year in college. And my dad, at that time, said, if you want to do these additions to the building, you're going to have to make a commitment that you're going to be here and come home and do this, because if none of you kids are interested in taking over the business, I'm not going to put these additions on. So I came home from college and we built the additions on the back of the building. And we built 1 foot the property line and as close to the lake, which was, as you can see, there's just enough room to drive around the back of the building there.
And then when we get to the picture of the marina, remember this shot with the 2 piers? So, and you're also talking about how quickly they built the back, the back building.
The store was pretty crowded, and when we were building the back, it seemed like a big area back there. And they started the day after Labor Day. And right just before Christmas, the carpenters, we had plywood down in the back, and we had the interior walls up. There was no trim up or anything. And when the carpenters went home on Friday night, we kind of took sawhorses and plywood and started moving merchandise into the back room to use it for the weekend. And we got a little too much back in there. And when the carpenter showed up on Monday morning, he took one look. I says, well, I guess we're done. And we just kind of finished it up from there. We rolled out some carpeting and nailed pegboard to the walls, and we were in business.
Went to work. And then you also mentioned that you purchased the old Betcher's Garage. Why did you buy that property, and when did you buy the property?
We had wanted to buy that building for quite a while, and it was never for sale. And when it was for sale, we didn't get in line and get it bought. But Florian Kwiatkowski put it up for sale, and I immediately approached Florian, and we made a deal, and I bought the building. I paid it off over like 5 years, and very glad that we bought it. It was a gas station at a time, but we really just wanted the storage. But we ran it for a few years at a gas station, and I don't know what we would do without that storage building today.
I imagine everyone here knows what we're talking about, but why don't you tell them, what we're talking about and where that space is, just in case anyone doesn't know.
Well, it's the building directly south of the store and house there.
So that's where they store wheelbarrows and,
Well, we have pallets of salt and potting soils and cow manure and grills and lawnmowers, and then we have a small workshop in there that we try and keep everything running.
right. the all-purpose building.
Yes.
And then in the early 80s, your brother-in-law and your sister come back, or one of your sisters come back.
Correct.
And what do they bring to the business?
Well,
Because that's another important point of change.
my big weakness is bookkeeping. I hate it. And my brother-in-law, Paul Burgess, was a bookkeeper for Beneficial Finance. And they lived out in New Jersey with my sister. And he expressed an interest in coming back. And in the 1980s, I don't remember the exact date, they moved back to Bailey's Harbor. They bought Tom Ziegler's house on Cherry Road. And he slowly took over the bookkeeping process. He was here for probably 3 years. And then we saw the writing on the wall that we had to update, we had to enlarge if we were gonna make it. And that's when we pursued a second location. And then we built the Fish Creek Ephraim store in the middle 80s when my kids were very young. And we built an office over there, and Paul does the bookkeeping from that location for both stores. And we kind of run it, it's one business. We tried in the beginning to match inventories, but it just didn't work. There's 12,000 square feet over there of retail, and there's only 7,500 in Bailey's Harbor. So the inventory started to get mixed up. We still buy a lot of things together, large things. We split a lot of orders. But it ended up because of the bookkeeping, he's over there most of the time. And because of the maintenance and running this store, I'm over here most of the time.
And then once that had taken place, there's like almost right after, there's the introduction of computerization. And it seems like the story we all have heard in our own, our own jobs is like somebody, computers come into our world and it's going to transform everything, and we have to sort of tool up, and it changes the world. And how did that affect your business and your folks?
We hung on to the old cash registers as long as we could until we basically got an ultimatum from True Value that they wanted their orders electronically submitted. And they wanted us to have a computer, and they wanted us to be using computers to run credit cards, and they wanted this and they wanted that. And we dug in our heels, and finally we had no choice. If we were going to remain with True Value, we had to computerize. The first computer system cost us $80,000. It was a system that tied both stores together. There was modems and mixers and multiplexers and all kinds of stuff. And every time a storm cloud went overhead, it failed. And we would have to dial up each other. We had phone lines, and it was just a nightmare. But it ran until it died. And of course, 5-7 years is a long time for a computer, and that was the end of that. But the sad part was when we put the computers in, my folks had no interest in running them. We tried to explain, we tried to teach them as best we could, and it just didn't sink in. And the computers make the easy things hard and the hard things easy. And to sell a newspaper, you had to push like 14 strokes on the keyboard, and it drove them crazy, And so that was one of the things that didn't drive them out of the business, but it made them take a back seat because they were no longer able to work the checkout. They still did other things for many years after that. They helped check in the freight and work the store, but the computers are what drove them out. Or drove them crazy, one of the two.
Yeah. And they also were going out of town in the winter more and more, you were saying.
Yes, when I first came back, my folks would go down to Florida and spend 3-4 weeks, and then they would come home, and then I could go down with my wife Peg, we were married at the time, and we would go down for 2 or 3 weeks. Well, then the next year they'd go for 4 or 5 weeks, and we'd go for 2 or 3, and then they'd go for 5, 6, 7, and then we'd go for 1, And it slowly ended up that they started the winter in Florida. And they were very gracious about letting us run the building, letting us run the business. And they pretty much let go of the reins and handed them over and enjoyed it.
And I got a couple other pictures I just wanted to ask you about. And these are, you know, artist drawings. Were these remodels of some sort?
The building was originally painted brown. And we decided to change it, so we painted it white. That's a drawing by Jerry Dahmer. And it's kind of what the building looks like today, although I think we have a little more green trim on it right now.
But it was nothing structural, it was more just,
It's pretty much the way the building is today.
okay, how about, got one more.
That's the back of the building, the back of the motel. We put those decks on maybe in the 90s. It's just a nice drawing that Jerry Dahmer did.
Oh, okay. And then, tell us about this. This is getting pretty close to the present day.
Yes, that's a picture from out on the end of the break wall looking back towards the store. You'll notice that the marina, the dock, comes right directly out the back of the store building. When they were building the marina in town, they didn't have enough land. It was too small. And they approached me and I approached them also in the fact that we can work a deal here. And I gave the town of Bailey's Harbor approximately 45 feet of property on the shore directly behind the building. So, and I also gave up my riparian rights, so they could build a breakwater directly behind the store building. In exchange for that, I took an easement, a restricted easement for the property, which is directly behind the store, which I used for parking for the motel building. So in essence, I gave the town property and then I took it back. But the property is owned by the town, otherwise the town could not apply for grants to build a dock on somebody else's property. So the town had to own it. And if the town didn't own it, the marina would not have been built. So it was a win-win for me in the fact that I lost my 100-foot dock, but the dock was falling apart anyway. I also have 2 slips that are for my use perpetually, whatever that means, but I think it means forever. So I have 2 slips that I can use in exchange for giving them the property to build a dock. So it's been a win-win. The town has been a great neighbor for me, and I try to be a great neighbor for the town.
And then one more thing, and that is there's a third generation coming into the business.
Yes, there is. Couple of stories. Adam is now working full-time in the business. He would be here tonight, except he's following his father's tradition. He's at a fire. There's a fire in Gibraltar tonight. Apparently a house burned down, and he's over there right now helping with them. But there's a picture of my dad, myself, and my son. And Adam is being very active in the business, and hopefully someday he'll take over, and I'll start spending 4 and 5 weeks in Florida. See if I can work that same sweet deal. But he's very active in the business, and I'm very proud of him. He does a good job. I just thought of something else, and then it went out of my head.
Well, if you're ready, maybe we can just throw it open to some questions.
Sure.
So does anyone have any questions for Gary?
Yeah, Gary, can you talk about your mom's role in the hardware store?
My mother was really the push in the hardware store. She was very, very active in the buying. In fact, my dad had some words about her about how she could buy. She could buy things, and She was a very good buyer. She bought all the clothing and kind of softened up the store in the fact that put in the housewares. We used to sell lots of men's clothing, women's clothing, blouses, swimsuits. We still sell some of that stuff. She was very active. She worked very hard. She raised us 5 kids. When we had employees, she made lunch for all the employees. Steve Adams, his folks have a place on Kangaroo Lake. I was just talking to him this summer. He came back. He hasn't worked for us for 20 years. He says, one of my great memories is coming back and working in the store and getting a lunch. He says, I've never had a job where I get lunch. And she would make sandwiches and usually had a dish of ice cream with some fruit on top. She was very active. The early store did not have a PA system. And it probably wasn't needed because one of my father's great quotes was, "Hey, Phil, how much is this?" And she knew all the answers, and if Dad didn't know where something was, she did. She was a great asset to us. Even up until the day she moved into the Meadows, the day before she moved in, she helped us with freight. And when she moved into the Meadows, I asked her if she would come back on Thursday to help with freight. And she turned me down. She said, I'd rather not. She's still doing well. She's at the care center at Scand. She knows exactly what's going on, but she cannot walk, she cannot speak. She's barely able to feed herself, but she knows what's going on. The only communication I have with her is she sometimes laughs when you say something funny. Otherwise, there's no real expressions on her face anymore or anything. But she's very healthy, very strong, and doing well. But she's a very key ingredient. Her maiden name was Gustafson. She's from Montevideo, Minnesota. And when her mother, they lived on a little river in Minnesota, and every spring that little river overflowed. And the water came out, for hundreds of yards on both sides. And when she brought her life's earnings over here and invested them in Dad's house, and she looked out the window and she said, "How far is that across?" And Dad said, "It's about 80 miles. And she says, well, he says, we could jump across our river in the summer. How high does that water come up? And my father assured her that that water doesn't come up, it stays pretty steady. And in 1952, the year after they built the house, a tornado or something hit Lake Michigan and caused a seiche on the lake. And it put water over the top of Ridges Road. And it put boats on the road in Ephraim, and it filled the basement with water. I still remember my dad's talking a story about he was standing in the backyard and he had some boots on. And the water was all around, and he looked up at the window, and there was his mother-in-law just shaking his head.
It's like, oops.
And Gary, all of us locals out here, we lovingly called Nelson's Hong Kong. And the Nelson family all knew it. It was because you could buy reasonable things there. And, it was made in China for, that was pretty exotic. But I have to also add that when you're talking about parceling up the store and the building and making it into apartments, when our daughter got married, a lot of the family stayed down there, and they said it is the only motel they have ever stayed in that they could sit on the john and brush their teeth at the same time.
We had to make bathrooms, and some of the closets were converted into bathrooms. Nothing was done by code, anything. We just ran pipes, whatever we could.
I think Kristen is.
I lived at Nelson Hotel 2 different winters, and more than once, I came home to find a plate of cookies, or a plate of cake,
or a plate of some sweet something that some special person left for me, and you know, life in a small town.
My wife has had a big part in the business too. She's, does a lot of work in the store. She runs the motel, and she's been very active in both buying, checking out, and helping us run the store, along with other list of employees. And I thought about trying to do a list of the employees, and I'm sure I would miss somebody, but there's a lot of them.
I think it's time for us to move on to the next portion of the evening. And Lynn is handing out copies that Peg put together. That goes back to the 50th, Peg? The Nelson's Wonders?
The Store of Many Wonders.
Is that the one that goes back to the 50s? Their 50th anniversary?
We started it when the store was 50 years old. We wrote some of those up, and now we've kind of changed them. So hopefully you get a good charge out of them. They're fun.
Well, let me now introduce Leanne Despotas, who's going to take over, and for the next part of the evening, will be honored Mary Ann.
If you can just give me 1 minute to shut off some things here. That should be okay. Before I start in earnest, I just wanted to let you know, if anyone's interested, we have membership forms and a little overview of our plan for the Historical Society near the back door. And if you would also sign out. I feel like I'm feeding back. Am I? No? Oh, okay. This is in my ears then. When you leave, if you could sign out, just so we had kind of an idea of, you know, who all came, we'd really appreciate that. What I have to say is, to begin, to me, and I think probably to all of you, local history is important. Stories of neighborhoods and towns connect to larger communities, to states, to countries, even across the world. Local history becomes sort of a history of the common man, and it reminds us, perhaps, that history begins in our own backyards. Now, tonight, we are exceptionally proud to honor Mary Ann Johnson. And if there's anybody here who doesn't know her, which I would find really hard to believe, Mary Ann, could you just sort of just stand up for a moment so that everybody knows who you are? She is a person who loves history, and she loves local history. And lucky for us, she especially loves Bailey's Harbor history. You can see the results in the many posters she brought of articles she's done in the past for almost any aspect of Bailey's Harbor history you can think of. I was curious about how she wound up in Little Bailey's Harbor, and I asked her, and she said she and her family were looking for a summer place, a place they could go for vacations in the summer. And she decided Wisconsin sounded like a great place. And she came across an ad for Max Welton Braes and thought, oh, this looks good. So they came. And they loved it. They loved the Scandinavian sort of style of landscape, you know, and the picturesque aspects of Bailey's Harbor. And she spoke with Harry Ridings, who was the owner of Max Welton Braes at that time. And they asked, well, is there anything for sale around here, preferably on the water? And he, of course, knew of a parcel. They negotiated for it, bought it, and eventually built their home on Frogtown Road in Bailey's Harbor. That was over 40 years ago. And she's been here ever since. In 1969, she opened Here to Him. Say it right? Yes, that's what exactly. Which is and always has been a just beautiful shop filled with Scandinavian clothing, giftware, all sorts of just lovely things. It continues now. It's in a store sort of across from the parking lot of the Catholic Church. In the intermediate days, it was at the site where Nathan Nichols' store is now. But it began, this is kind of serendipitous, it began in Betcher's garage that we were just talking about with Gary. And I remember that very well. I was, that summer, I was newly married. We were up here spending time with my mom, and I bought a just beautiful load-and coat, which I'm sure I would still be wearing today if I were still, like I was in 1969. But it was great. Well, being a lover of history, she was a graduate in history and Spanish from St. Olaf's College. She joined the Door County Historical Society, I would guess probably first thing. And as a member, I'm sure an enthusiastic member, in 1990, she was asked if she could prepare a history of Bailey's Harbor. And by this time, of course, she probably knew almost everybody in Bailey's Harbor and cultivated them, spoke with them, learned about their pasts and their family's past. So she agreed to do it. And the result of that was a dinner presentation at Max Walton Bray's, which was a huge success. It was covered in the Advocate extensively. And when Marianne was telling me about this, I didn't even know this, because at that time I really wasn't living here. She said it took a lot of effort and everything, but when it was all over, it was well covered, everybody was happy about it. And I thought this was so cute. And I said to myself, I did it, which was inspiring, I think, for her, because she then gathered a number of local people in her home and started the Bailey's Harbor, I believe you called it the Historical Research Foundation, didn't you? Did research. Right. And they just did research on various topics. She also was real good at getting families to write up sometimes things about themselves, or she would do it for them. And these things often appeared in the paper also. My mother's family was one of those families. So she got these people together, and I cannot even begin to list for you the topics, but if you've looked over the articles, you get an idea. They ran the gamut from North Bay to the taverns in Bailey's Harbor, to all the little rural schools around Bailey's Harbor, to the Irish settlement, to lighthouses. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And also, in addition to those activities, which produced every year a wonderful dinner where people would come together and the members of the Historical Research Society would take turns presenting different aspects of each topic. And they were filmed, as Lynn was pointing out, with these videotapes on the tables, leaving a record that we can still consult. In addition to that, she has personally overseen the addition of buildings in town to the National Historic Register, which include Albert Zahn's Birdhouse or Bird's Park on the north end of town, the Blacksmith Inn, Walter Zahn's blacksmith shop, which is right across the street almost, just right over there, and what used to be the Globe Hotel, which is at the foot of Howard Avenue. It's that kind of longhouse, symmetrical on either side, which was a hotel back in the day when we were a seaport, or a lakeport, excuse me. Now, I don't know if you succeeded with Cana Island, the town hall, and the range lights, or is that all of them too?
We got on. The only one I haven't been successful with is the old Bailey's Harbor Lighthouse out here. The
Okay.
1851
one, and the reason they've turned me down is it's in such poor condition.
Okay. So that, I mean, I would say if that was it, you know, that would be a huge accomplishment in and of itself. The paperwork, there's just so much to be done with that. Now, Marianne, if I've missed something, I apologize. But even if I missed several things, the list that I've made, I think, would be impressive. It's a daunting list of achievements. The Bailey's Harbor Historical Society members and our guests, I'm sure, see you as an inspiration. We're very pleased to offer you, if you could just step up here. Yeah, you see, I'm not real polished at these things, but I'm doing what I can here. Yes, I like that. You're always prepared.
Right.
We're very pleased to offer you this plaque as a token of appreciation for your work and your generosity as you, even now, as we speak, continue to explore the stories of historic Bailey's Harbor.
Thank you, Leanne. Lovely, lovely. Yes, we'll pass it around.
Oh,
That's
do
good.
pass it around.
We'll pass it around.
And I'll just leave this to
Yes,
you.
leave that there. Looking out here, I see many of the people who have been in my cassette videos over the years. And we started in 1991. And the date she was speaking of, when I was honored by the Sturgeon Bay, I'll let you hold this up, you can show them. This was in 1990 when I first presented for the Sturgeon Bay group here in Bailey's Harbor, a complete history of Bailey's Harbor. And they surprised me by presenting me with a Historian of the Year award, which I hadn't accepted. Yeah, Historian of the Year, and I've got that hanging at home too. So I have quite a few to hang, but we can pass that around. And then the two men who were in charge of that historical society, Mitchell Mackey, now deceased, and Orville Schopf, treasurer, also deceased, said, Marianne, you really should do a history of Bailey's Harbor. Nobody has done it before. Why don't you start a group? So I thought, why indeed, I can do that. And so I had a group come to my home on July 30th, 1991, and they included, and they've all signed this, I'm going to give it to Leanne so they can keep it. They included Olivia Traven, Lee Traven, her son, Charles Tischler, Dorothy Walschlager, Elsie Anclam, who also did a story for us, Lenora John, her mom, of course, Elsie Tischler, Ken Zock, Marguerite Zock, Susanna Baldry here tonight, Roland Pyle, her dad, Orville Schopf, the treasurer of the society, and Mitchell Mackey, the president, who wrote to say thanks and good luck. And with that, I started out. So there are pictures in the back, too, of many of the people who came to this original meeting. And then we started doing the histories. And the first one I did was, of course, the Irish settlement, because I held it out here at Maxwellton Braes. And it was very successful. We filled the ballroom with people. And all of these, of course, were taped. Everything from the beginning has been taped. And they are all in the library here now. We have 25 in all. And all you need to do is go in with your library card, take it out for 2 weeks, bring it back. We haven't lost any yet. And if you want to, you can even make copies of them. I don't mind. It's a real compliment if they make copies. But the 25 keep rotating all the time out of there. The second one I did was Maxwellton Braes Caddy Reunion, and that's an excellent one, too, if you haven't taken that out. And then the group from North Bay called on me and said, why don't you come out here and do something? So I did. The next one we did was North Bay. Bonnie Gordon was always so interested in history, and she was very cooperative. We always had dinners before, because I've learned as a Scandinavian, people like to eat first and then listen. So we still, had dinners first and then the program. So after we completed North Bay, then we moved over to Cana Island. You'll see the articles are here. Then we moved down to Booze Point. Then we went across to Tough Point. We just kind of hopscotched around the map. But every time people were happy to assist us and to speak, and that's why it grew, because the people of the town were willing to help. Nobody, I don't think, ever turned me down that we asked, and they all enjoyed doing it. And with us tonight, I have Pat Meckenberg and Clayton, who always came to the door and collected money for the dinners, and they are here with us this evening. Two other people who I had hoped would be here were Ida Orsted and Greg Orsted, who did all of the videotaping for years, and they were supposed to be here tonight too, and I'm sorry they're not, because they've done a great job. But in the meantime, we are continuing to research people. And 2 weeks ago, we had the Crowvoss matriarch, the head of that group, come to a breakfast in the morning, and they are working on the Crowvoss history, and that will be presented next June. There are 4 generations of Crowvosses out here by Kangaroo Lake. How many of you buy fruit from them? Many of us, yeah. And then the other one that I've been working on is the Hickey brothers, the fisheries. Those boys are always so busy, they never have time. But I put in a request again, and I'm hoping this fall, when the whitefish work is over, that they will go, volunteer to speak, because their aunt, Alice Hickey, worked for me in the store for 4 years in the early 1970s, and she used to tell me all the stories about the dances down here at Schramm Hall and all the fun they had. So I'm hoping the Hickey boys will be able to do this too. If not, I remember quite a bit of it myself. Are there any other Hickeys around that we know of? Well, Pat's a Hickey. Yeah, Pat is a Hickey right here. I'm sure she remembers some of these. And we do find the people, they're still around here. When we did the school reunions, we did all the schools, the Pershing School, the Woodland School, the Kangaroo Lake School, and right here, our own school up the hill. And we had a reunion for all the schools. We must have had more than 120 people here for that. That was a luncheon here, and we took pictures of all the groups. You were here for that, weren't you, Pat and Clayton? Very successful. And then we did North Bay School all by itself, and I'm sure you're aware of Phoebe Erickson, the artist, who wrote The Black Pony, and we have a lot of those copies that are here. Well, when she died a few years ago, her nephew, Jim Erickson, who's done a lot of work for me in history, called me and he said, I'd like you to come to the funeral for Phoebe. Well, I knew she had died out east, but I didn't know what in the world the funeral would be. Well, of course, it was her ashes because she had been cremated. So Jim had arranged this very solemn funeral out at Bailey's Harbor Cemetery with a row of chairs around and in the middle a hole. And we all had to stand up and speak about our experiences with Phoebe, what we had done with Phoebe. It was a very heartwarming experience. And then he put the ashes in the hole and we all put a rose on top of it. And then Jim said, now let's all go for apple pie down here at Weisgerber's, which we did. That's a great way to have a funeral. So I will continue, my interest in history as always and continue doing research. But I'm happy that there is a new group coming in who's following the law. Not that I didn't, but at any rate, I wasn't officially organized, no. But we never had any books to keep, you see, because I never paid anybody. They had free dinners. When they came here, I would always pick up their bill as my guest. And I did have quite a few people from the University of Wisconsin who came to be speakers. And then they would stay overnight at my house down here on Frogtown Road and have breakfast in the morning and go along. So we never were really involved with money other than the money that they picked up for the other dinners. So it's been a very enjoyable 20 years for me doing the history of Bailey's Harbor. And I appreciate your coming tonight. Thank you.
Well, Marianne, I think you've made the last 20 years more enjoyable for all of us, and I think no one will disagree with that. Does anyone have any questions? Or maybe you would prefer to have a little bit of time to, peruse some of these wonderful stories that she's written over the years. And may I say, there are still more treats back there that would be, we would love to have somebody take care of those for us. Christy?
Does anybody have any stories they want to tell about Nelson Hardware?
Oh, that's a great idea. Yes, ma'am?
When we have company from St. Louis, we always take them there. Never seen anything like Nelson's.
Well, I find that I am able to visit that store almost every single day of my life for one thing or another. I don't know if that means I'm not organized or what, but it's just so easy,
Gary said his dad was an entrepreneur. First time we went to a Bailey's Harbor, 4th of July parade. It rained, and where was Gordy? Selling garbage bags, 75 cents. And they ran out of garbage bags.
Yes.
Yeah, I've known Gary a real long time, and for many, many years, when I would leave, Gary would always say, well, Jim, give me a call when Frogtown Road slides into the lake. No joke. Just about 2 years ago, I got on the phone and I did not call 911. I did not call Door County Sheriff, but I called Nelson's True Value Hardware Store, and I was able to say, Gary, Frogtown Road has slid into the lake.
Well, actually, speaking of Frogtown Road, I can share just a little family story of my own. I always refused to drive northbound on Frogtown Road. And my children made sport of me all the time for that. But I told them as a child, I was underneath there and I saw what wasn't underneath there. And so finally, I too was gratified one day when I could pick up the phone and say, I told you that was going to happen,
I tell everybody that our house is half made of Nelson's Hardware.
Everybody enjoys it there, there's no question.
I think all of my guests have bought sweatshirts.
That I can totally believe, yes?
My children always knew when it was summer, when we'd go in the 60s and 70s, and there were rafts hanging from the ceiling. They knew they were here and it was summertime.
That's great. Yes?
Just this past 4th of July, I was looking for tiny miniature little flags for a cake decorating project. I looked in every kitchen store, Sturgeon Bay, the Fish Creek one, every gourmet, every place I thought, Walmart, Target, Pomida, that might have those little tiny miniature flags. And I couldn't find them anywhere, and I walk across the street to Nelson's and they have them.
Ma'am?
We live in Indiana, and starting about April 1st, if there's something we can't find, we say, we'll just wait and get it at Nelson's.
Well, I just always feel if you can't find it in Bailey's Harbor, how much do you need it? That's kind of my feeling. Yes, ma'am?
I'm a visitor from Illinois and came up here with my boyfriend's family, and it was the most amazing thing I found in the store that you could buy spare Monopoly money.
Amazing. Oh, yes.
We have sheets of blankets in our cottage from Nelson Hardware from the time we bought the cottage. And I have said over the years, if they only had bread and milk, you wouldn't need any other store.
That would pretty much get you by. I mean, I was caught in a blizzard here a couple of years ago in December. A friend of mine was visiting with me, and I didn't have anything with me, for it. So I just went down there and got some boots, and, I'm still wearing them. I mean, not right this minute, but, but I'm still wearing them. Well, I guess that kind of wraps things up. I think it's been just a very fun evening, and I had no idea that Gary Nelson was such a raconteur. I didn't know that. But his timing is great, I guess. It's just wonderful. Yes, Susie?
When our next show was going to be, and
next program is going to be in when? You know.
It's September, I honestly don't know the date. Roy?
It's on the forward back, the handout.
We're organized, we have this information.
Yes, it is September 16th at 7 p.m. And it's annual election meeting follow-up featuring a slideshow of historic and vintage postcards of Bailey's Harbor.
Thanks,
So
Lynn.
vintage postcards, and we have wonderful, I just want you to know they're wonderful postcards. So some of them go way, way back, so it should be interesting.
The one last thing I did want to mention is Mary Ann in 2002 put together like a little historical walk up and down Main Street in Bailey's Harbor. And we've been looking that over just in the last several weeks. And even in 8 short years, things have to be updated, new owners, new places. And so that's a little task that we're going to be undertaking too. These are available in the...
Yes, I have these at my shop, and they're also available at the Information Center. And one other thing I wanted to mention was, when I did get the places on the National Historic Register, one you didn't mention, the most important one, the Bailey's Harbor Town Hall and the library.
Oh, I thought I did
That was a
mention it.
biggie. No, you mentioned
Oh,
the
I'm
Globe
sorry.
Hotel,
I'm
which
sorry.
is Eunice Schlintz's old home. If you know who Eunice Schlintz is, we're talking about the building, the double building next door to Schramm Hall, which is now Harbor Market. Follow me?
It's next door to the Harbor Market.
Yeah, next door to Harbor Market. And
Fish market.
that was Eunice Schlintz's home, and we got that on the register while she was still alive.
Nice.
But then we also did the Bailey's Harbor Town Hall and Library, which is one of the best. The only one I have not been able to get is the old lighthouse, and maybe the new group will have better luck.
Maybe.
Let's hope so.
Thanks, Mary Ann.
Sure.
Okay. And I think that sort of winds things up, does it, Roy? Is there anything else that needs to be done? Are we good? Okay. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming.